Okay, folks, we have an emergency. But before I get into it, I want to ask a question. Who do you trust?
Who do you trust? Me?
I had another movie that I reviewed that I was going to put up, but something is happening in the zeitgeist right now. And I feel like I have to respond to it. Something about it compelled me to change course and get this review out first, because something about it just feels, I don't know, feels necessary. So I happen to have an opinion on this movie that differs from anything else you might be hearing or reading about in the world right now. And I have to say, I actually appreciated this movie. That movie is, of course, Joker. Folie à deux. Let's get into it. So, okay, the movie's been out for a little bit now, and I'm almost positive everything you're hearing about this movie is overwhelmingly negative. You might be hearing some things about some of the positives, like the performances or the cinematography, and in some cases, some of the songs. But that's probably it. Everything else you're hearing is not favorable when it comes to this movie. And I come here today to offer a different perspective, a different way to view this film. And to me, the more I thought about it after having seen it, it seemed like the punchline to a joke that was established with the first movie, 2019's Joker. And if you look at the two movies together, it's one long joke. And not in a bad way, like it's a bad joke.
It's a bad joke.
Not that way. But in a more thoughtful way. And it's more like it's a dark joke. It's dark comedy, both movies. Joker, 2019's Joker, sets up the joke and gives us, it's like a long joke, how comedians tell a long sort of narrative joke that at the very end you get a punchline. And I think the two movies together feel like that. One is a setup, one is a punchline. I remember when this movie was announced, my first thought was, why? I don't think that the first movie needed a sequel. I don't think you needed to continue that story. It was just fine the way it was. And then I heard that the movie was going to be a musical in some form. It's going to have a lot of music. And that's another question. First, it's why a musical, and how is that going to work with a character like Joker? I didn't have any clear answers, but I said, okay, we'll see when time comes. I'm sure I'll watch the movie and see what happens. Now, having seen it, I think, well, I have some thoughts about the approach. So it's interesting because this movie feels like its packaging is more or less a normal movie with musical numbers thrown in. And it feels less like a proper musical. If you look at how a musical generally functions, where the songs function as a part of the story, the songs, like you could listen to the music and then have the story told to you. You can get key elements of the story just by the songs. This movie is not that. It's not a musical in the traditional sense, like what we know as the modern musical. The music functions as a character piece. They're character instances. Because if you look at it in terms of the only two characters that perform in the musical numbers are Arthur / Joker and Lee / Harley Quinn. There's something going on there. It's very much it's music in terms of character and how the songs say something about the characters. So in that way, it's actually inspired. Like the choice to use music as a way to say something about these characters and what they're experiencing and having the characters use the songs to illustrate something about what they're feeling in that moment, what they're thinking, what they're dreaming about, what their future plans are, what their fantasies are. There's something really interesting about that approach, and I don't think it's altogether bad. I think the criticism feels like it's probably too much of it. Personally, I lean more to the opinion that there is probably slightly too much of it, but I don't dislike it. And it's unique. It's something that's not expected. The approach is bold. It really takes risks, and I appreciate that a lot. Actually, I like that Todd Phillips and his team just went all out and leaned in and just followed through on the vision. And I think you take what comes with that. I mean, as an audience member, you have to just accept what's there. Well, you don't have to accept it, but it's just that this is what we have. You have to sit with what comes up as you watch what's there. And I applaud the bold approach. I appreciate that risk taking. Something else that was immediately apparent about this film is how pretty it looks. It's a visually stunning and striking collection of images. And you could see this from the trailer. One of the things that struck me just from the trailers, I liked not only how the shots looked, just sort of how they were color graded and the sharpness of them, but how they were framed. There was some really striking framing that really just does a lot of it does a lot of work. It and in some cases it just really just evokes things that you don't really know how to describe. There are several shots in this movie that are just, oh wow, they're just not only they're cool shots, but they're artistically constructed. Whoever thought them up should just get paid extra. And obviously this is not accounting for some of the ones that might have been happy accidents. Some of the shots that were discovered on the fly just by experimenting. However they got to it, a lot of the shots in this movie are great. And a lot of the sequences look great. Yeah, cinematography is ridiculous. Lawrence Sher should get top credit. If he's not nominated for the camera work in this movie, I'd be very disappointed, because the shots are very strong. Then there's the acting, which is another very strong aspect of this movie. Obviously, Joaquin Phoenix destroys in this role. He comes with it. You really see, you feel this is one thing about, I've said this before about Joaquin Phoenix and a couple other movies that I may have seen that I probably didn't like as much. For instance, Beau Was Afraid was one of those weird movies. To me, it was weird, and it didn't feel like it. It was just really hard to, like, how do you follow this movie? What the heck is going on in this movie? But if the movie is hard to follow, you can always follow Phoenix. He's fantastic. And I think the same is true for this movie. If you didn't like this movie, you can't deny that Joaquin Phoenix really makes this movie. He's the one thing, I think, that he's immensely watchable. And not only that, he manages to elicit like feeling from the audience. You care about this guy. Yes, he plays a guy who's done some not good things, but you still oddly feel for him, and you see the fact that he's broken, and the way Phoenix plays it is so tactile. It's like you can almost touch the vulnerability. He's almost childlike in a way. You can see his little boy self coming out in the character of Arthur Fleck, and how Fleck is almost still a little boy in some ways. You see there's this glimmers of innocence and just wonder about him, even as he is playing a character who is broken and mentally he's sick in a lot of ways. And it's really just it's a treat to watch him, and it's not easy to watch either. Sometimes you feel bad for the guy, and there are times where you root for him and you want things to work out in the best possible way given the circumstances for him. Well, Phoenix is expectedly fantastic and does not deliver a performance that is beneath anything he's capable of. In fact, he always manages to meet or exceed expectations, and I think he does the same here. He's consistent, and it's just good. It's consistent from his performance in the first movie. Obviously, he was good in that movie. He remains good in this movie. Lady Gaga was surprisingly good. I actually liked her as an actor. You really get to see her acting chops. I haven't seen a ton of movies with Lady Gaga in them, but the ones I've seen, she was always, passable. She's an actor. She can act. She can. And this movie is a good example of what she can do. Obviously, we know she has a great singing voice, so her singing is great in this movie also. But it's the moments where she's not singing and she's actively, playing in scenes against Phoenix and against other people who she might be in scenes with. It's a treat to watch. It's good to see her really digging into this role. And then the other standout, I would say, is Brendan Gleeson. I thought he brought, obviously, tremendous presence, but some real weight and some complexity, some nuance to the story. He's one of the prison guards at Arkham, and he manages to be like, he's menacing, but also he straddles, he's also somewhat friendly to Arthur. You see, he does have a heart a little bit. He does care a little bit, but he also has to maintain an image in his role as the tough correctional sort of prison guard guy, lead prison guard guy. So it's interesting. He gets to play these two sides, and he's not around a lot, but he's memorable and he's effective. And I think he's great. You also have people like Steve Coogan, Catherine Keener, other side sound support that are also really good. The story is something that's quite interesting. If you look at it from the idea that the story is not something people expected. And I think this is why people are upset. This is one of the reasons why people are upset, is because the story is not what people wanted. And it's not what they thought about going in. People expected, I think, because this is what I thought. Going in, this is going to be a movie about the Joker somehow escaping Arkham with Harley, and they're going to wreak havoc upon Gotham, and that's the movie. This is not that movie. This movie, for the most part, takes place in one place, or two places rather, across Arkham and a courtroom. And it acts as one part courtroom drama, one part musical experience, and with some Arkham scenes sprinkled throughout, really. And that's the story. It's a courtroom drama mixed with a musical experience. And I don't think, in fact, I'm positive that no one thought that was going to be the movie. What's interesting about that from a story perspective, though, is that this is really, you really get to see a trial happen. This is Arthur Fleck on trial for the crimes he committed in the first movie. In another movie, the trial would be like the first third of the film. And then, of course, something would happen. He would escape and then go on a spree, which is interesting because we often forget, when you think about Batman's rogues gallery and when they get caught, if it's a movie where they don't die at the end, if they're caught, they're automatically sent to jail. There is no trial. We forget that the justice system exists, even for criminal masterminds and supervillains. If you're caught by Batman, you have to go through this, like the court systems and stuff too. You still have to be tried. I think just because people see that these guys are supervillains, that they shouldn't get a trial. But that's a little, I mean, because I guess people think that that's boring, hanging out in the courtroom with, you know, whoever, Killer Croc on the bench, Killer Croc, having to be testified against, whatever it is. I don't know. I'm not quite sure how interesting that would be from a comic book fan standpoint. Although there's something, it could be good, especially for someone like Joker. We just never seen him like have to hang out in a courtroom being testified against with an attorney who's defending his obviously deranged actions. This is not that Joker, though. This is a Joker that has committed crimes, but not from the position of being obviously deranged. This guy is mentally ill. He's been abused. He was just in a bad way, and he's committed crimes as a result of something else. Their response to feeling like being not being noticed, not being treated with kindness by most people, by society or whatever. And he's responded by lashing out. That's not the Joker most of us know from the comic books. Joker doesn't really care either way about stuff like that. But that's the Joker we have in this movie. When you think about it from that perspective, the Joker in this movie, it makes sense that there could be a courtroom story where there's an actual trial. And it lasts actually it's pretty much the whole movie. This is a courtroom drama movie through and through ish. It's not like Law and Order or any of the other, like a courtroom drama show, Matlock or Perry Mason or whatever. There is a version of this movie that could have been like that without the music. I think you could have had a film like that, but then that also would require, likable attorneys and people who are watchable and engaging. Catherine Keener as one such attorney is that. I think if the movie had her around longer, you could have had a story like that, but that's not really what you get. And I think because of how the story is framed, you get something that's no less interesting, just different. A couple of things that might feel like missteps for this movie, just from a general perspective. I mentioned the music earlier, and the music is not terrible. I don't think it's bad that the music is here. My feeling was that there might have been a little bit too much of it. And then some of them might have gone on a little bit too long. I might have cut some of them a little bit. If it were me, I might have cut some of the sequences down a little bit. Just to have them, you want enough of the music and the songs to give the impression of what you want conveyed. I don't think you want to have a full songs playing out the whole time. I think maybe a verse or two or something that evokes something that you're trying to say about this character or this moment or this whatever it is. At the end of the day, so maybe the songs are probably too long and then maybe a little bit too many of them. Aside from that, it's fine. It actually doesn't kill the movie, but those are just little hooks that I think that the film gets snagged on. The other thing about the music is that I think the lack of original music does something. I think you lose a little bit of something because the songs weren't songs that came from the characters. I think if there was original music written for Joker and Harley to sing, that might have enhanced character stuff a little bit more. I mean, I think what we get is fine to like say something about the characters, but I think you could say more. You could do a little bit more with music that was originally from the characters, like original songs written, but then that would actually require, songwriters and stuff. The movie would be more a traditional musical, I think, in that way, not totally, but it would lean more there because you have original songs from the perspective of these characters. I think the movie could have really done something special with that. You already have people singing in character, and that's great. Those are actually some of I liked that singing when it was like a little bit messy and it's raw and it's not polished, and it sounds like Arthur singing. It sounds like Lee singing, not necessarily like super like great vocals and like, oh, that's part of the charm, I think. So you already have that, and I think that coupled with original songs from the characters that say something about what's happening tonally would have been fantastic. Unfortunately, you don't get that. And additionally, I think another hook for me that the movie gets snagged on is Lady Gaga's singing voice. I'll explain. Gaga, obviously, we know, is a wonderful singer. She can sing very well. I think something about how great her voice sounds when she's fully singing takes away something. And I'm not quite sure what it is yet. I'm not quite sure I fully put my finger on it. I think it's probably, but then now that I think about it, in fact, just at this moment, I'm recognizing, well, parts of when she sings really well, because the songs are, here's the thing that I'm just making sense of right now, is when Gaga is singing perfectly, when she's like masterfully singing, obviously some of these are some of the more questionable sequences that may or may not be fantasy, because everything in our fantasies is perfect when we fantasize about stuff. So I buy into it. I can buy into that, because when we hear Lee singing, it's broken and it's like raw. It's like a real person who does not have vocal training sings, which, by the way, I think Gaga should get that much more credit, because we know she knows how to sing, and she's in the position now in this role as Lee to sing poorly, or she has to dumb down her singing, which is another skill in itself. To be someone who knows how to sing well, have to then move certain dials and switches around in your vocal performance to make it sound not as polished as it would sound if you're singing as you would any other time. That's serious business. And I had problems too when Gaga was announced as being cast in this movie. I was like, what is that? I'm not quite sure. I don't know how I feel about that. But I approve. Some other thoughts that I had while watching the movie, I could see why people might complain about the extended sequences. Some of them might, like I mentioned, might be too long. Too much dancing, too much singing, too much of any of the sort of more theatrical bits. And then I realized during my viewing, I said, well, these things are not that far-fetched from Joker. We always see him dancing around, and he's always like, maybe he's not singing songs, but he speaks sometimes very musically. He has like a lot of like he ha ha ha, like he has like some, there's like he does dance, and so some of this stuff feels just like what we know of the character, but just sort of remixed and then expanded and then beefed up. Again, you have to remember, the first movie does a good job of building some of these pieces into the character. We see him have moments of dancing and playing with, the movie plays with music, and it plays with like his fantasies and stuff. The first movie did the same thing. This movie just sort of expands that. It does a little bit more, like what you would expect most sequels to do. The adage seems to be, when you get a sequel, is do the same thing but do more of it. More is more. That's what seems to be the thing when you get to a part 2 of something. And this movie does that. It's anybody's guess. Well, it's not really anybody's guess how you would receive it, because most people, we know now, have received it not as favorable. But it still does more in that way. It does more of some of the stuff that was already seen in the first movie. And it still feels like there's elements that still feel like they're a part of Joker, even though this is not the Joker we recognize. But the things we know about that character are still here. We just didn't get it in the ways that we wanted or we expected. And the other thing that made, I think, the experience much deeper when I thought about the two movies together is that these movies both deal with this notion of reality check. What does it mean for Arthur to have fantasies and then be checked and be grounded? Both movies do this. We're presented with this image or a series of images of what Arthur is seeing, feeling, what he wishes things could be, what he wants. And then we're presented with what actually is. And for better or worse, it's consistent, I think, between the two movies. Just something I recognized, and I thought, oh, there's still something there it feels in line. None of this stuff is sort of out of left field. It's been previously established what we see, some of this stuff. The other thought that came to me had to do with if we got the movie that I think most of us thought we were going to get, which is Joker's in Arkham for a little bit, and then he escapes with Harley, and then they wreak havoc. At some point, someone was going to have to stop them. The movie wouldn't end with them getting away with all the crime they committed, would it? It might have. It could have. But then, who's that force that's going to stop the Joker? There is no Batman yet. And then further, who is Joker without Batman? We have a version of it with the Todd Phillips movies. And we're not supposed to really see a Batman, really. So I think there's only one or two other ways this movie could have gone. But you also could have had them wreak some havoc and then escape, and then maybe set up the idea of a potential Batman at some point. Maybe you set it up. I don't know. There's probably some ways to do. It's just something I thought of, like, well, what the heck is this without Batman? This is not a Batman story. This is a Joker story. It's a character study about this man who is in the predicament he's in, and we follow that story. But what's weird about that is that it almost seems like in a world without a Batman to inspire someone like the Joker or other things, you have a world where Arthur Fleck becomes the Joker, or a version of the Joker, and then he almost occupies the space that would be Batman. In that, the Joker is the character across these two movies that inspires anarchy and inspires other types of actions, crime and other things happening in the city. As a result of Joker's existence, you inspire something else. And I thought that's another thought that struck me. It's like, oh, okay, so you don't have a Batman and the effects that would bring. You have a Joker and the effects that gives the proceedings. And that's something that even if you take that Joker out of the picture, you still have something else going on. Because of his existence in the first place, something else is happening. And something about that oddly still feels like a Gotham City tale still, which is kind of cool, that thought. Because ultimately, if the Joker is an agent of chaos, like we know him to be, he still inspires that, even though it doesn't look like how we thought it was going to look. So something about that still feels like, even though the character looks a little different, the spirit of Joker chaos is still apparent in this picture. So I don't know. Oddly, there's something that's still winning about that idea. I kind of like that the spirit of Joker runs through this movie. And lastly, I want to talk about the love story a little bit. And for better or worse, there is a love story here. It may not be as rich as what people might have wanted, and which, let's be honest, this is Joker and Harley Quinn. How you could tell a really rich and engaging love story with these two. But I don't know that was the intent. In fact, I'm almost positive that part wasn't the intent. But there is a dark, rather twisted love story, which is really, if you know anything about those two characters, that's the crux of their love story is a dark and twisted one. Just if you go back to the source material. But as this is an adaptation and not a direct translation, the flip of it is really, I thought was I appreciated that. I didn't expect we're used to stories in which the Joker is the person who is the one who is manipulating and sort of twisting Harley into the situation. And this is not a secret. Anybody who knows those two characters knows that's the sort of general how the story goes between those two. But then here it's flipped a little bit. You have Arthur as a character who is the one being pulled and pushed and swayed into the net of Lee's love, however skewed it might be, which is kind of cool. It's different, and there's still elements of what we know to be the weirdness, the twistedness of their love affair. It is there's something actually kind of sweet about about you see what that does for him, because Arthur ultimately, like everybody else, wants to be loved, wants to be seen in a certain way. I think he's always wanted that. If you look at the first movie, there's something about that. He's always sort of wanted that, wanted to be seen, wanted to be loved. And in this movie, he still wants to be seen, wants to be loved, and he gets that in a weird way. And it's kind of cool how the movie. I think it's pretty cool how the movie portrays that. The relationship is what it is in this movie, and regardless of how you feel about it, there are some beautiful exchanges where the relationship is depicted, and that's cool. So that's going to do it for this review. If you've stuck around to the end of this video, thank you for your time. You could have been doing a whole bunch of other things than listening to me talk about this movie that so many people don't like. Again, I liked it, and I recommend a viewing. I recommend giving it a chance. I think it deserves a chance. Even if you decide to walk out the first 10 minutes of it, that's fine. Or look, between us, even if you decide to wait for streaming, which I don't think you should do. I think because the cinematography is so great, it deserves, I think, a big screen viewing. Just for the cinematography alone. I think watch it in the theater. And then, of course, Joaquin Phoenix's performance, you got to watch that too. But even if you did wait for streaming, I think you give it a chance because it's kind of cool. Again, you might not like it, but you might. I went in, I tried to be open. I went in with an open mind, and I left with a lot to think about. And I didn't outright hate it. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it. I think I appreciate it. I definitely did appreciate this movie. And I think, like the first one, it's not one that you would watch like you would the Avengers or something like that. It's not a popcorn-y movie. Even with the fact that it has music and stuff in it, it doesn't feel like one of those feel-good musicals. There are a couple sequences in there that touch on that and hit that nerve a little bit, but ultimately both of those movies, they have a lot. They're heavier, I think, than that. So just something to think about. But again, I recommend a viewing, and if you do see it, let me know what you think. I'd love to hear what you think about it. Although I'm almost positive how you might feel about it. But there's always room for surprises. I thought it was a good movie. Curious to know what you think. But again, thank you for your time, and I'll be back with another review coming up real soon. I will probably go back and put that other review up that I was going to put up now that this one's out of the way. This was just too hot. There's a lot of heat around this movie, and I needed to I had to address it because it was just a lot of noise, and I needed to had a few things to say. So thank you for hanging with me for a little bit. All right. I'll see you in the next video. Take it easy. Be well. See you next time.